Imagine, after many years, suddenly losing the ability to articulate your deepest emotions, thoughts, or experiences in your own mother tongue. Imagine that the language that once flowed freely, that painted vivid pictures, and that whispered secrets of your childhood is now foreign and distant. This is the reality for some who move to new countries and adopt their dominant languages. There are those who slowly, sometimes unknowingly, lose their native dialects as they soak in the language of their new homes. It seems beneficial, doesn't it? To master the language of your adopted country? But there's a hidden cost to this adaptation. This cost isn't just about the language itself, but the deep connection to one's past, to one's very identity. It's about the trauma of losing a part of oneself that was once as natural as breathing. And here's where it gets intriguing. But let's save that for a little later, shall we? What's up, my inquisitive companions? Are you ready to journey with us into the world of wonders and unknowns? I'm your host Caesar, and here with me is the brilliant Sonia Guimaraes.
Hello, beautiful people.
Remember, we're here on the Curiosity Wonderland every day, spreading knowledge and feeding your curiosity. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell icon to stay updated with our latest episodes. Get ready, folks. It's time to dive into the mystery of languages and identity. Picture this, folks. Many years ago, a man in the Czech Republic, without warning, without any preparation, passed away in his sleep. That man was the father of the author of our tale today. This tragic loss came with a bitter realization for our author. She had always put off visiting her father, caught up in the whirlwind of life events, ranging from marriage to children to career. She often found herself swept away by the current of life, making a trip to her homeland seem almost impossible, like trying to somehow pause time. Her father's passing was a stark reminder of the relentless advance of time. It also shed light on a different kind of loss, a more abstract one. It was the loss of her native language. Czech was the first language she knew, the language she was born into. But as her family migrated from Czechoslovakia to Austria, Italy, and finally settled in Montreal, Canada, English became the language of her daily life. Czech, her native language, slowly receded into the background. Now, many might applaud her quick adaptation to English, considering it a sign of a successful immigrant. But the truth is, research shows how deep our connections to our native languages are and how traumatic losing that connection can be. It's so profound that when our author returned to the Czech Republic after her father's death, she didn't just reconnect with her father's memory, but also with her native language, and by extension, with forgotten parts of her own identity. But here's the thing. The draw towards the dominant language of your new environment is undeniably tempting. The benefits are clear, even economically. For instance, immigrants who are proficient in the dominant language reportedly see wage increases of 15% compared to those who aren't. But as we'll find out, there's a lot more to it. What do you think? Imagine a child in a new country, trying to fit in. The pressure to speak the dominant language isn't just about future financial gains. It's also about acceptance, about being seen as part of the group.
It's like a survival instinct, isn't it? The need to blend in, to be accepted.
Absolutely. And it's not just about learning a new language. There's a struggle happening in the mind. The new language and the native language are like siblings competing for attention.
So, it's not a simple replacement of one language with another?
Not at all. Even when expressing thoughts in one language, the other language is there, in the background, struggling to be heard. It's like the two languages are wrestling for space and resources in the mind.
That sounds exhausting.
It can be. And if resources are scarce, like during mental exhaustion, the weaker language gets swamped. Over time, neglect can make the native language harder and harder to access.
That echoes the author's experience, doesn't it?
Indeed. The loss of a native language is not uncommon amongst immigrants. A 2004 survey found that less than half of first-generation immigrants claim to speak their birth language fluently.
And that impacts more than just communication, right?
Absolutely. Language is deeply entwined with our memories. Losing a language can mean losing access to parts of our personal history.
Wow, I never realized how profound the connection to language could be.
Now, we've talked about the loss of language in a personal context, but it goes deeper than that. A woman who had a traumatic childhood in Mexico was once treated by psychotherapist Jennifer Schwanberg. When she spoke English, she seemed detached from her early life experiences. But once she switched to Spanish, her emotions came flooding out. Her early memories came back with a vividness that was only accessible through her native language.
Just confirms what we've been discussing, doesn't it? That link between language and memory.
Exactly. And it goes beyond traumatic experiences. Let's take Vladimir Nabokov, the Russian author. He struggled to write his memoir in English, a language he was fully proficient in. Only when he translated it back to Russian did the details come alive. The smells, sounds, the visual details, all these were triggered by writing in his native language.
So, it's not just about remembering events. It's about the richness of those memories.
Yes, and losing one's native language cuts you off from more than just personal history. It also disconnects you from the culture that shaped you. You lose access to stories, songs, even the quirks that make you who you are. Losing your language can mean losing your context.
That sounds incredibly isolating.
It can be. In fact, a study in 2007 found that in certain communities, when less than half of the population could converse in their native language, the rate of suicide amongst young people was 6 times higher. Clearly, the loss of a native language can be quite devastating. Surprisingly, the benefits of maintaining a native language extend beyond personal well-being. A study conducted in the Midwestern U.S. found that American Indian adolescents who engaged in traditional language and cultural activities performed better academically and demonstrated fewer behavior problems.
So, being connected to their native culture had a positive impact on their overall behavior?
Yes, it even outweighed the influence of having a warm, nurturing parenting figure. The pattern is not confined to the U.S. either. A 2011 report from the Australian Bureau of Statistics indicated that Aboriginal youths who spoke their traditional language were less likely to engage in binge drinking or use illegal drugs.
That's quite impressive. How do we explain these benefits?
Michael Chandler, one of the authors of the suicide study we mentioned earlier, argues that cultural continuity fosters resilience, mainly by offering a cohesive self-concept. Without this continuity, individuals, particularly those who have experienced turbulence, face grave existential danger.
That makes sense. So, what happens when we drift away from our native language?
Well, as we distance ourselves from our native language, we create a gap between us and our past, our culture, and often, our family. English, for example, may offer freedom, but it can also be a tool for rebellion. It lacks the embedded respect and affection present in many native languages.
So, the shift to a new language can strain family relationships?
Indeed, especially when it comes to passing on cultural legacies. The author of our main article experienced this firsthand. As she and her siblings moved away from their native Czech language, they found themselves rebelling against their parents, diluting family ties and cultural values, and eventually living self-reliant lives that were vastly different from their parents' experience in their home country. Going back to our base article, the author shares her personal experience. After her father's death, she realized the gap left by not speaking Czech, her native language. She compared losing Czech to losing the string section of an orchestra unnoticed until it's gone. Its absence reveals the depth, texture, and coherence it lent to the music.
So, losing a language isn't just losing words, it's like losing a part of your self-expression and identity.
Exactly. The author also mentions the feeling of being connected to a part of her that only Czech could reach. After her father's death, she inherited an apartment in the Czech Republic and decided to spend 2 months there.
A chance to reconnect with her roots.
Right. Her first conversation with her uncle was strained, filled with misunderstandings. But within weeks, her fluency began to return. Words she hadn't used in decades came back to her, and she gradually regained command of the grammar.
It's fascinating how our brains hold on to our first language, ready to reactivate it when we immerse ourselves in that environment again.
Yes, it's like a dormant part of the brain awakening, bringing with it a depth of expression and cultural connection that was thought lost. It's more than just words, it's part of who we are. It's fascinating to note that forgotten languages leave cognitive remnants that can be seen mostly during the process of relearning.
So, even if we think we've lost a language, it's still there, somewhere in our minds?
Absolutely. Research has shown that exposure to a language earlier in life can result in accelerated relearning of grammar, vocabulary, and especially pronunciation.
Even pronunciation? That's surprising, considering how hard it is to lose an accent when learning a language later in life.
Precisely. The phonology or sound structure of a language is one of the greatest hurdles for adult learners. For example, Arnold Schwarzenegger, despite his accomplishments, will forever be marked by his Austrian accent.
Right. And that's not something we can just unlearn, is it?
No, we can't. The sound structure of a language gets fixed in our minds quite early. Infants can distinguish subtle differences in speech sounds, but they gradually tune their perception to the language they hear the most.
It's like our brains are hardwired to favor the language we grow up with.
Exactly. It's a lifelong imprint. Even if a language falls into disuse, the foundation remains, making relearning easier and faster. As our author explains, our brains are attuned to the sound patterns of our native language. Like how Mandarin speakers differentiate words through tone. But for speakers of non-tonal languages, the brain doesn't treat tone as significant for distinguishing words.
It's mind-boggling how much of our earliest language lingers with us, even after we thought it had faded. It reminds me of a personal experience. As a child, I lived in Mexico for a few years. My family would often visit a local market where I loved to hear the fruit vendors call out their goods, manzanas, platanos, naranjas. Now, even after all these years, just hearing those Spanish words brings back the scent of fresh fruit and the sounds of the bustling marketplace.
That's a great example. It's not just about the words themselves, but the sensory memories they trigger. For our author, hearing the name of the national Czech dish in Czech doesn't just represent a concept. It brings back vivid memories of family meals with the flavors, fragrances, and routines associated with them.
It's like language is the key to our past, unlocking memories and emotions we didn't even realize were still within us.
Exactly. It truly is a testament to the profound bond between language and our individual identities. Our author shares that since returning from the Czech Republic, speaking Czech with her mother, even though it requires more effort, makes their conversation feel more tender. It emphasizes how language can be a tie to our roots, a connection to our earliest nurturing moments.
It's as if the language we first learn is a direct line to our most basic emotions and experiences.
Exactly. And it's not just about the words and grammar. It's also about the culture and experiences we associate with that language. For instance, our author's gardening habits, nurtured by her father's voice in her native Czech, helps her feel connected to her ancestral Moravian homeland.
So our first language is like a time capsule, preserving not just words, but also memories and feelings.
Right. It's fascinating how our author's reconnection with her native tongue has even influenced her writing. She often finds herself reading a passage in Czech or steering her internal monologue towards it.
It's as though the language is unlocking something within her, guiding her creative process.
True, it's a beautiful example of how the language we speak can shape our mental landscape and influence how we express ourselves creatively. This connection to our first language, it's like sinking into a familiar pool of words and phrases where we find delight in the sounds and rhythms. It is a part of us that remains untouched, sitting quietly within our soul. It's not just about communication, but it's also about identity, memory, and even our creativity.
It's a fascinating aspect of our lives that we often overlook. How we express ourselves, how we remember, and how we connect with our past, all of these are influenced in so many ways by the language we speak.
And it's not just our first language. Any language we learn can shape our experiences. But our native tongue, that's a direct line back to our earliest memories, our family, our roots. It's a part of us that persists, no matter where we go or what we do.
It's truly amazing when you think about it. Language is so much more than just a tool for communication. It's a part of who we are.
And, as our author discovered, it can even serve as a guide, awakening parts of us we didn't even realize were there. So, whether it's our first, second, or even third language, it's more than just a collection of words. It's a fundamental part of our being, our identity. It shapes not just how we communicate, but also how we think, feel, and remember. So, what we've discovered today is that our first language, our native tongue, is not just a communication tool. It's a part of our identity, a pathway to our past, and can even shape our thoughts and emotions. And losing it can have profound cognitive, cultural, and emotional consequences.
It's like losing a part of yourself, isn't it? But on the flip side, reconnecting with it, like our author did with her native Czech, can unlock hidden parts of ourselves and even guide our creativity.
Exactly, so next time you're tempted to push away your native language, remember, you may just be pushing away a part of yourself.
And that's the mystery unraveled. Thanks for joining us on this journey into the heart of our identity, our language. If you liked what you heard, go ahead and blast that like button, drop a comment, and share this episode with your friends.
And remember, keep your ears, minds, and hearts open for the next episode of Curiosity Wonderland. We promise it'll be another fascinating exploration.
Goodbye, everyone.
Goodbye, and keep being curious. I discovered this fascinating piece, The Strange Persistence of First Languages, on the Big Think site. It was published on the 15th of November, 2023, and written by Julie Sedevi. Check out the full URL in the video description if you want to delve deeper into this subject. Now I'll take my leave.